Chapter 9, Ecclesiastes 9. We're getting down to the wire. We have 4 classes and 4 chapters. The math is pretty easy. We probably won't make it. No. We're going to do our best. As we start into chapter 9, it's really filled with some very positive remarks about happiness and contentment and being prepared in life itself. But the chapter begins on rather a dark note. The idea of evil or things that are bad or hard on us under this earth, or on this earth under the sun. Derek Kidner said that before the positive emphasis of the final 3 chapters can emerge, we have to make sure that we shall be building on nothing short of hard reality. In case we should be cherishing some comforting illusions, chapter 9 confronts us with the little that we know, then with the vast extent of what we cannot handle, in particular with death, the ups and downs of fortune, the erratic favors of the crowd. But first it asks the crucial question, whether we are in the hands of a friend or a foe. And I think we introduced that last week as we were starting chapter 9. And so the preacher says, but all of this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. And the idea of the love and hate here is trying to understand God's relationship to us, what He allows to happen to us. Their deeds, he says, are in the hand of God. That is, God knows their deeds, and they will be judged according to those deeds. Matthew 16:27. Whatever it is, love or hate, most likely refers to God's intercourse with man, whether he is a friend or a foe, as Kidner said. The creation reveals the existence of God. The ancient religions revealed man's ability to see God around him. I think that's one of the things we look at when we study world civilizations and the history of man, the dawn of civilization, and those kinds of classes. We start looking at almost a comparative religion of the ancients and what they believed. What did the ancient Egyptians believe? What did the ancient Sumerians believe? What did the ancient Sumerians believe? The Akkadians, and all throughout history, we look at their beliefs, many of which evolved with the people's evolving technology and so forth. And so what we do find is that in every civilization in the history of the world, there has been a belief in something higher than man. And I don't think that's just them observing the world and say there must be something higher. I think that we as human beings are created with an innate sense that there is something more. And Solomon touched upon it when he said that he put eternity in our hearts. We anticipate something more. Now, understanding exactly who God is and how He interacts with man and things like that takes observation, it takes revelation. We certainly wouldn't know the full extent of God's scheme of redemption without the revelation of the Word of God. But as we observe and as we read and we watch man's relationship to this, even if we were a foreign people and didn't believe in God but still believed in something, his relationship with this other power, this otherness that he comes in contact with, that he's sure that exists. We look at those moments in history and we see that man is interacting with him. But it takes more than just mere observation to discover how God feels about man, whether it is what he says is love or hate. We can't just observe. And the reason is because we observe life from such a small speck of time, don't we? I mean, we write things down and we go back and we read those histories, but we really, even with written histories of this country, we only go back, a couple of hundred years. It's a very small piece of time compared to the whole. And so when we try to judge an event that's occurred to us in a small window, sometimes we don't always judge it correctly. One of the news stations here in Denver runs an ad or commercial on their channel about News 360. Have y'all seen those commercials? And there's one, for instance, there's a shady-looking character leaning up against a wall, a building downtown or something, and a woman passes by. She notices him, and she adjusts her purse, pulls it in a little tighter, and she steps up to the curb, and he runs over and he grabs the purse and he pulls on it, and you think, oh, he's stealing her purse, and then the camera, does this little 360 move, and it pulls around, and there's a truck coming down the road, and she's about to step out in front of the truck, and he's grabbed her purse to pull her back away from the truck. When we only see a small window of things, then we often, it's difficult to interpret the facts soundly, we might say. And this happens all the time. Those of you who have social media accounts of any sort, if you've ever watched the videos that people post, a video here and a video there and the things that go viral, and oftentimes they're a very small window, and they edit those videos down to this small window because they want you to believe one thing. But if you saw the whole video, you might actually come away with something else. Jennifer?
I was just thinking that because even written history is not necessarily fact. And even our own memories over time fail us. So it makes it even harder yet.
Yeah. We have so much of our lives that affect and impact our interpretation of fact. You're entitled to your opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. Facts are facts, but what happens is we look at the facts and we interpret our circumstances based upon how we perceive those. And so our perception is, for better or for worse, it is clouded or colored, tinted, we might say, by our experiences, our education, our place in life, our current circumstances, what's happened to us in the past, what we're looking forward to in the future, and those perceptual filters, our background, who we are, looks at that evidence and interprets it a different way. For example, we had a social media encounter. I don't normally encounter people or respond to people much on social media, but this one lady had asked. I posted a picture about training up your child. It was really Deuteronomy chapter 4 or chapter 6 and verse 4 about you teach these commandments diligently to your children, and she just wrote a comment on the picture, said why? Well, I put on there, well, God, we should all, no matter who you are, even if you deny God and are an atheist, if you have a certain goal for your children, you have to teach those goals and values to them diligently when you lie down and when you rise up and when you walk in the way, as the proverb says, as Deuteronomy says. And so she, I explained. Now, I understand God to be real, and therefore His values to be preeminent, and the best values, and those are the values that I want to teach diligently to my children. And she came back hot, I might say, and said, "How? Why are you telling me I have to pray to some white guy in the Middle East?" I didn't say anything about anyone's race or where they lived or anything. I'm talking about God, and so, but her background, who she is, what she believes, clouds her judgment, and she views speaking about God and about Jesus through this filter that she has put in place. And we face that all the time. And I know we're not in Ecclesiastes right now, but this is an important thing. Everyone we meet is going to have certain perceptual filters like that. And when we're trying to bring them the gospel, that's why it's important to get to know someone, to know their backgrounds. Look, I don't know. I don't know her enough through that one social media interaction to figure out what's going on in her mind. But there was such hatred and vitriol for the idea of Christianity, for the idea of God, and so I responded to her, and she took down her comments, and so I can't even view them back. Can't even go back and read them again and be angry again. No, I didn't get angry, but at the same time, it would have been nice to be able to sit down and have an actual conversation with her and find out why her bias causes her to have such venom toward Christianity. And that's why whenever we're doing evangelism, I tell you all the time that the most effective means of evangelism is knowing people, is to know people. Now I'm getting into my sermon and wasting time on my class. So let's get back to Ecclesiastes. Let me ask one question. Why do you think, maybe I asked this last week, why do you think man might think that God hates him? Tim?
God made it, so he must hate us.
Yeah, I think that's good. Mark?
We know we do wrong, and so we have to go.
All right, that's a good point. When we know we've done something against God or even against our fellow, even if we don't understand the concept of God, when we have treated our fellow man badly, most of us who are not psychotics feel bad about what we've done, right? And so, surely the gods must be angry. Now, the gods must be angry. Y'all probably don't know that movie.
Well, we know that people tend to remember the bad things much more than they do the good things. They say, you can do 5 good things and 1 bad thing, and you'll remember that 1 bad.
Right. And people apply that to their understanding of God. Naomi?
Is it sure that this is saying that God hates us, or is it saying that God hates sin and that it awaits us as a consequence of what we do?
It could be, but he says, that as, while he's examining and trying to figure out how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God, and so these are the righteous that he's talking about, whether it is love or hate, man does not know. And what man is he talking about? He's talking specifically about the righteous and wise, which would indicate that these, I know that we have sin, but he's using this in the good people sense versus bad people sense. And so I don't think he's so much looking at the end of time judgment. He's looking at, if God has not revealed himself, we might be confused about understanding who God is. And the idea that both are options. Oh, I didn't mean to go through it there, but both are options before him. And so it is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous. And now we get to see what he sees or what he's focusing on that causes him to wonder if it's love or hate. And it's this phrase that he's used a few times already, the same event. What's the same event that happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and to the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice? What's the one event, the same event? Yeah, death. Death is that equalizer. And so if we strive all our life to live productive, beneficial lives to the community, and some guy over here is a detriment to society and hurts the community, and eventually they both die. As we sit back and watch that, we'd say, well, why did he spend so much time trying to be good? Because he's going to die just like the one that spent all his time being bad. They both died. There's no difference between them. As the good one is, so is the sinner. And he who swears is as he or he who shuns an oath. The one who's trying to be trustworthy is just like the one that doesn't even try to keep promises and keep faithfulness. And he's saying it happens just the same. And so he recounts the same event that happens to them all. This, he says, is what? It's an evil. Evil. How is it that Solomon is able to say of death, which happens to good people and bad people, people who sacrifice and people who don't sacrifice, and he says it's an evil? In what sense does he mean it's an evil? Okay, death is a result of sin, absolutely. Romans chapter 5, verse 12. The day that you eat of this fruit in Genesis 3, you will surely die. Genesis 2. Becca?
There's no correlation between the length of your life, or obviously whether or not you can avoid death, and being righteous. Everyone finishes the same way.
Okay.
Death does not distinguish between the two.
Okay. Terry?
And since death is a result of sin, God does not compare one sin to another and say, that's worse than that one. They're all, sin is just awful.
Okay, so let's take this idea that we die as a result of sin. Solomon says that's evil. It's evil of God to allow us to die because of sin. How is that evil? Huh?
Not fair.
I don't think that I'll mention again, I don't think he's viewing death here as a result of sin. He's just viewing death as the end of life. And the end of life happens to everyone, and he says this is an evil. And in fact, he says that the hearts of men are full of evil. Now, we understand what this idea of evil is, the sin and the unrighteousness. Is it the same as this one? If not, what is this one? How does the Bible use that term evil? So sometimes, obviously, it's talking about unrighteousness or sin and iniquity. And like I say, I think that is what we're talking about here when he talks about the children of men. Sometimes their hearts are full of evil. And of course, we saw this in the right before the flood, man standing before God. Madness is in their heart while they live, and after they go to the dead, and after that they go to the dead. I don't think evil here, though, he's talking about unrighteousness or iniquity. He's looking at the calamities that befall mankind. That they're hard to accept, they're hard to understand, they're hard to, we have to wrestle with them. God, why did that tornado tear down my house? Who do we know that struggled with this in his life? Who? Job, right. Job, look, he admits at different times in his speeches, I know I've got sin. But his defense was what? I don't have sin that deserves this. I haven't done enough to just, and then he points out, he says, there's people living in town that are 10 times worse than me, and they're not facing what I'm facing. And his plea is what? If I could talk to God, if I could stand in his court, I could make him see that what's happening to me is unjust.
Just as Job looks at his relationship with God and the calamity that's befallen him, how many times do things happen to us and we still ignore the fact that the devil is active in this world? This is his world, not ours. We're here temporarily waiting for ours with God.
Right.
And too many times these bad things happen. God, why did you do this to me? And Mother Nature had a hand in it. The devil had a hand in it.
Evil people had a hand in it.
All of those
Yeah.
play.
Time and circumstance had a hand in it. I mean, we could go on. There's so many things.
I got up and ran to the bathroom and hit my toe and broke it on the door.
Yep. That was your builder's fault.
Actually, it's my fault because I didn't turn the light on. But I mean, all of those come into play because we're always looking, we're trying to do this.
Right. So what's the answer to all this? What's the answer? What did Job come away with as the answer? because he finally got to talk to God, right? And God, he said, where were you when I hung the world on nothing? I laid the foundations of the world on nothing. Where were you? Where were you when I was teaching the animals how to care for their young? Where were you when I taught the animals how to feed themselves? Where were you? So God is looking. He's looking at his universe, his world, and he says, "Here's what's happening, and it's happening because I know what's going on, and you don't." And the ultimate thing that Job comes away with is no matter how bad or evil or unfair, unjust the world is, God is enough. If you have God, that's enough. That's ultimately going to be Solomon's conclusion too when we get to the end of the book. But isn't that amazing? Instead of fretting over how unfair life is and how bad things get, remember who's on your side. Remember who's on your side. Terry, did you have a comment?
God is above all and God is in all.
Absolutely. Ephesians 4:6. But he who is joined with all the living has hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. And they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. And so, when here's death, it's not just the same event that happens to us all. It is the line of demarcation between knowing and unknowing, between doing and no longer doing. That's the separation. A living dog is better than a dead lion. It's funny how the attitudes toward dogs have changed since the Bible times to today. But of course, we might say, of course, a living dog is better than a dead lion. Everyone wants a dog, right? But you've got to remember that this is at a time when dogs were basically wild animals, and they feasted on dead carcasses in town. And the Bible sometimes describes them as going through the streets. And in fact, what would eventually happen to Jezebel? The dogs came and ate her and her bones and left only the soles of her feet and the palms of her hand. They were considered vicious, dirty animals. But Solomon says, look, as bad a reputation as they have, if they are alive, they're worth more than the majestic lion who is dead. And so it is with our lives. The living know that they will die. What does it mean that they know that they will die? What does it matter if I know I'm going to die one day or not? How's that going to impact me? Terry? Yeah. It means that I'm going to live with a view to that moment. Remember, all the way back in chapter 7, when he was talking about the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth, and the house of mourning is better than the house of feasting, because the living will lay it to their heart. One day we're going to die. Now, I'm not talking about how do you explain that to your 5-year-old child, but now that we're adults, we understand that we are progressing toward death. And with that in mind, then what? Right? That's the great question. Death, then what? Now, he says they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their memory is forgotten. Here, you might say, oh, but wait a minute. I remember my grandpa every day of my life. I miss my father, and I think about him often. He is not forgotten. But eventually, there will be a generation that does not remember my dad or my grandfather, and their memory will be forgotten. Tim?
It is also, I'm thinking about, as the individual, you'll have no memory.
Yeah.
Because like the atheist, when you're dead all over.
Like Rover, you're dead all over. And I think I've used this before, but it does bear repeating. In Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, Act 3, Scene 2, when Antony is giving the funeral speech. He starts off, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. In that speech, he says, the evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred with their bones. What they've done that was good, we bury it with them and we forget all about it. But we remember the bad. And I think Tim was saying that a little bit earlier as well. And so that's the idea. I have been forgotten like one who is dead. I have become like a broken vessel, the psalmist said in Psalm 31 and verse 12. Their love and their hate, their envy have already perished, and forever they are no more, or have no more share in all that is done under the sun. The finality of death and how it changes our relationship with the living. We no longer have intercourse with them while on earth. So therefore he says what? Go, eat your bread with joy. Wait a minute, Solomon, you just told me I'm going to die. Look, life happens and then we die. That's what he's saying. Is it long for some people? Is it short for others? But we're all going to meet that idea, that finality of death where we're cut off from the living. Our relationship with him is different. And so he says, so what should I do? Based upon the fact that we're all going to die, what should I do? He says, go and eat your bread with joy. Drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. What's he saying? Go be happy. Enjoy life. Now, we understand that there is life beyond the sun, right? And we want to enjoy life beyond the sun, which means that enjoying life here under the sun means enjoying the things which God wants us to do, right? Enjoying those things that God wants us to do. And so we eat our bread, we drink our wine, we do those things which are God approved. In fact, he says God has already approved what you do, allowing them to occur. So let your garments always be white, I think is an indication that you are to live your life in a righteous way or a good way that becomes beneficial to the society. Let not oil be lacking on your head. The idea of instead of just saving up everything for a rainy day, go ahead and use what you have. Use the resources that God has given to you. Because when you die, you can't put oil on your head and enjoy the scent that the perfume gives you. You can't enjoy that new chariot. You can't enjoy all the things that you've saved up for some time later when you die. So enjoy them now. They're gifts from God. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life. I guess from men's point of view, when you're married, it's a vain and empty life. No, enjoy life with your wife. Enjoy the things, again, here that God has given you. One of that is the wife whom you love. All the days of your vain life. This has nothing to do with you married or not married. It has to do with the fact that ultimately life is going to end. It's not the permanency of life that we abide in or trust in. All the days of your vain life that He has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. And so that is your portion in life. That is the part which God has given you. But I love this. And in your what? Toil. All right, so some of you are saying, so all I need to do is enjoy life. I'm calling the boss tomorrow. I'm not showing up. I don't have to work anymore. I'm here to enjoy life. I don't enjoy work, therefore I don't have to work. But notice how Solomon mitigates that enjoy life with toil, which you toil. He mentions it twice. Don't forget, you still have responsibilities. So don't not show up to work tomorrow. Go to work as you are expected to do. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Don't we love that verse? Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. What does that mean? If something's worth doing, it's worth doing well, right? That's what he's saying. If there's a project ahead of you, do it. Do it right. Don't do it halfway. That's what we're supposed to do. Remember, he even talks about that. Paul talks about that in the book of Colossians when he talks about slaves obeying your masters. Don't give them just a little pittance of work. Only when he's watching, and then when he's not watching, you're goofing off. You give him an honest day's work. That's what you're supposed to do. There is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. So put your time and energies in getting it right here. Sheol, of course, is the place of the dead, and it puts an end to life on the earth and its joys and responsibilities. Or as Jesus would say, for the night is coming when no man can work. In John 9 and verse 4. And so work, understand this about work. Work gives us purpose in life. You take those that cannot work or will not work, and they lose their ambition. And, the first day they get up at a regular time and they might do a few things around the house. But eventually, they don't want to get up. They don't want to do anything because they have lost their sense of purpose in this life. Now, as we get older, obviously, it gets to that point where we can't work, and we deal with that when it comes. But when you're able-bodied and you're choosing not to work, or you're able-bodied and you've lost your work and you can't find another job for whatever reason, you're without work. It's hard. It's hard to stay upbeat. It's hard to stave off depression in those moments. And the longer you go, the more difficult it is. And of course, the downward spiral is when you walk into a job interview and you're Debbie Downer, and you can't look an interviewer in the eye, or you can't smile at times and things like that. You likely won't get that job either, and it just makes it worse and worse and worse. It is a downward spiral. And so he says, whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might. Do it with everything you've got, because it's what you have in this life. Again, I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happens to them all. Does the fastest runner always win the race? Back in the 80s, I believe it was, in one of the Summer Olympics there, I think there was a runner by the name of Michael Christie. Do y'all remember that name? He was a sprinter from Great Britain. And he was favored to win the sprints that he was in. He was highly favored to win. And, on your mark, get set, and the gun fires, and immediate fault. It was Michael Christie. And so they went back and lined up again, and immediate fault. It's Michael Christie again. He didn't win. Time and chance happens to them all. The fastest runner may trip and fall. He may venture out of his lane. He may fault at the start, pull a hammy, stub a toe, look back. Time and chance. Or how about the battle? The battle's not always to the strongest, right? Our country is based upon the weaker beating the stronger, right? The war, the Revolutionary War, we were outnumbered, outtrained, outsupplied, and yet the band of scrappy American soldiers won the war. With God's help. Bread to the wise. Wise people sometimes don't get bread. Or riches to the intelligent. The smartest people aren't always the richest people, right? There's the old adage about the fool and his money, right? What happens to the fool and his money? They are soon parted or separated, right? But that doesn't happen on every case. Favor to those with knowledge. This one reminds me of the attitude toward public school teaching. You know, most people look at teachers and the phenomenal work that they do, and they think, you know, how can a football player in the NFL get paid more than a teacher? Because they are supplying knowledge, but they're not getting the favor. Right? Doesn't that apply in a situation like that? Time and chance happens to them all. That's what happens. We don't know what chance and we don't know what time is going to happen, but they will change the fate for the fastest and the strongest, the wisest, and the smartest. Man does not know his time, like fish that are taken in an evil net, like birds that are caught in a snare. So the children of man are snared at an evil time. And again, I'm not sure that this is talking about necessarily sin and iniquity as it is. Think about what Paul says. He says that redeem the time, for the days are evil. He uses the same word. They're evil. And what he means is that time is against us. Isn't that what Mick Jagger said? Oh, wait, he thought time was on his side, right? But what Solomon is telling us is time is not on our side. That, you know, the days are evil. We are marching toward death. And so when will we die? Well, death often comes like what? Like the fish in the net, the bird caught in a snare, unexpectedly, right? Death comes unexpectedly. It suddenly falls upon them. Tie that in with 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 1 through 4. So how, they're saying peace and safety, and then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor upon a woman who is pregnant. It's unexpected. Well, it's somewhat expected. You think about the woman who's pregnant. You think, well, she's about ready to. She's at that point. She's ready. She wants this. But when it actually happens, that moment when it actually happens is quite sudden and unexpected, usually, and inopportune, we might say. I've also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works around it. But there was found in it a poor, wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not heard. It's interesting because in these verses here, we see that race is not to the swift, the battle is not to the strong, favor is not to the one with knowledge, bread is not to. So here's this situation where the king with great fanfare and power ought to be able to besiege this little city, but because they had a wise man, they were able to stop the king. But in the end, they forgot about the wise man. You know, woohoo, look what we did, and they forgot how they were able to do it. And so this poor man's words, and though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not heard, even if you look at it and you say, well, he didn't raise a sword, he didn't fight off the enemy. We're the ones that did that, but they were able to be victorious because of his wise strategy. Solomon's saying, look, the wisdom, even if people don't regard it with the kind of value that it desires or deserves, it's still better. It's still better than foolishness. It's still better than might or just sheer strength. The words of the wise are heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. And so give an extra thrust to the parable by showing first how valuable and then how vulnerable wisdom is. We are left with more than a suspicion that in human politics the last word will regularly go to the loudest voice, verse 17, or the coldest steel in verse 18. seldom to truth and seldom to merit. Because life's not fair. We must learn not to lean on anything as fleeting as public gratitude. Shakespeare noted again, this from his play As You Like It. Freeze, freeze, thou bitter day, or bitter sky, thou dost not bite so nigh, as benefits forgot. Though thou the waters warp, thy sting is not so sharp as friends remembered not. And so it's difficult when those that have passed on and their memory is forgotten, and we look at that and we say, that's terrible. But the ultimate conclusion is wisdom is still better. So the idea of be happy, enjoy life, and cleave to wisdom. Even if it doesn't sound better now, it will always be better. Appreciate your attention. I even go mark this day on the calendar. We finished a whole chapter in my class in one class.